Hey guys, I'm Adam. I'm one of the creators of Chilled Circuitry, and I just want to say thank you for watching this video and maybe watching the previous one showing the full build. This is a more long-winded version of the build, showing every component, what we did, why it was done, and what we can learn from it and what's coming in the future. Thanks. Just listing off the specs real quick, we're running a 3060 Ti with an i5 3600K, all wrapped up together, full water cooled from Byski, and in an NV7 complete white build. This case is a monster and was very daunting to build, and I was surprised actually how big it actually was. But it was a lot of fun to work with, and we're going to get into the actual breakdown of the build. Something that I already know I'm going to get in the comments and get kind of everywhere is, why would I water cool a 3060 Ti? Big part of it was the budget. I didn't have a lot of money to work with, but I still wanted to actually complete a build completely water cooled. I love the concept and design of these looks, and I love that the temps they get. In my own current system, I am running a kind of Frankenstein CPU cooler on my graphics card, and I really wanted to expand from that and see what was actually possible. As for the radiators, we are using two 360 rads. They are both 30mm thick. Ideally, you would normally run a 50 or even a 60 if that's impossible. I think it's from EK, you can get 58mm. Just because the sheer size of the case, you really have a lot to work with, and I feel like, at least in this build, if I had to do it again, I would definitely use thicker rads. Just to really use all the value of the size of the case. Bigger rads equals better temps, and it also looks better and fills the entire case without any wasted space. Most of the bends in the loop are straight 90s directly from the component to the distro blade, just to keep it clean, and because it's my first hardline build, I really didn't want to finick with doing any crazy spirals or extremely long bends, because the tubing I had only ran up to 500mm, so I felt like I was kind of limited what I could do, especially with my first loop. As for the fittings, all the fittings were Byski fittings. There was a bunch of extenders. They were all G1/4s, using 10mm all up to 45mm. This was mainly just to clear the radiators of any height issues, and also 90-degree fittings were used from like the graphics card, GPU block, and CPU block. Focusing more on the distro plate and the pump, it is rocking a DDC pump over what most people would use, a D5 pump. D5, a bit more powerful, a bit more reliable, but for the system I was using and the components, a DDC is more than enough, and from the test you guys will be seeing, it is more than capable to do its job. The cooling you're seeing flow through the build is EK's cryofuel. It is in the Azure Blue, so it's non-transparent, and after testing it for about a few days now, there doesn't seem to be any discoloration. It's all running as it should, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I really wanted to do something that was a little bit different and a little bit creative, and is why I decided to do the custom fan grills. I made it focused on Overwatch, so that's why you see the blue, the orange, the white, all the little designs with Reaper, and the custom grills were used in FlashForge originally as 3D models, and then I moved it over to Lightburn, where I learned to slice images, compile them, actually turn the 3D STL files into SVG files. That was so I could actually print them and laser cut them with a glossy black finish and a mirrored effect, so it looks really well under lighting and RGB effects. Alrighty, so getting into the actual benchmarks and seeing what temps and performance will be like, I went with 3D Mark, Blender, and Fairmark, and in addition to this, there is some GTA benchmarking, just to see what kind of real in-game performance and temps you should expect from a system like this. Alright, so jumping straight into 3D Mark, we can see the TimeSpy scores, almost hitting 12,000 score on the GPU test, and the CPU is hitting 13,500. These results, at least compared to any other system running the same components, were already 70% better in all regards, and even a little bit of a comparison compared to a i9 9900K and a 2080. I remember when those were really high-end systems. This 3060 over here is really outperforming it, which is pretty cool to see, and it's most likely because the temps are continuously lower, so the clock speeds from both the CPU and the GPU are just permanently high, because the CPU is pushing 5 GHz at all times without any hiccups. Something that is really important to mention, if we look at this table over here, we can see that the average temp of the GPU sits at 42 Celsius, while the CPU is hitting 73 Celsius. Now, if we compare this to a normal air-cooled system, the GPUs roughly sit around high 60s all the way to 80s, and same with the CPUs, any high i5 usually sits around 70 to 80 Celsius, so we're already seeing a massive drop and maintaining full clock speeds at all times. Alright, moving on to the CPU profile, we can see that the max thread score was just over 10,000, while gradually decreasing 9.5 to 7 to 4 to 2 to 1 per thread. So roughly 1,000 per thread, all the way up to the top where it kind of scatters itself. Probably the most important thing to take a look at is how the CPU is continuing to hit 5,000 megahertz. That's the clock frequency, so has a base lower speed, I think it's 3.2, 3.4, maybe 3.6. But when you play games, you want the clock speed to be maxed out so you get the right performance. And normally when temps rise, clock speeds have to go down and it kind of bottlenecks it and undevelops the system just to keep up with itself. Taking a look at the final part of 3D Mark, we can see that this table here kind of shows you where the temperature levels are sitting at. So the CPU does spike a little bit, gets into the 50s at max. That's running 100% of the CPU utilization under a stress test. So it's not a realistic scenario in a game. While the GPU is just chilling at 30, maybe 40 max. And that's under a main test. So when you can play something like GTA, which we're going to show in a second, you'll see the temps won't be as high as that. Alright, moving on to Blender. This is just a Blender benchmark score. So this compares the overall performance of the card compared to other cards. So if we take a look at our score, we got 3,367.68. And if we look at a regular 3060 Ti, the average score ranges at around 3,000. So we're already well above what the card should be performing. And I had a look at the comparison. We are sitting just under a 3070 Ti. So it's a really good score, really happy with the results, and the temps again didn't sit anywhere above 40 degrees. One final stress test before we get into the GTA footage. I just want to show Fairmark. Fairmark runs cards very heavily. It's more for a stress test to see if you have any crashes with an overclock, but after running this thing for over half an hour, the GPU did not exceed 41. That was the max, min was 31, so it was averaging about 30, 35 on average while I was running. And you can see by the chart, it's very consistent, so there was no down drops, no hiccups, and nothing. So card's running excellent. Alright, the final part of the test was doing a game. I wanted to do GTA. It's kind of a benchmark, a staple at this rate, and kind of gives you an idea of what a card can really do. If it can run GTA, it can run anything. That's kind of the logic I follow. So we can see under 2560 1440 resolution, this is running everything as high as it can possibly go. We were hitting 77 FPS. This is not true in game. This is through the benchmarking software in GTA. So we can see that the clock speeds are maintaining 2000 and then a memory clock of 7K with a GPU temp at 27, which is pretty ridiculous. And the CPU was sitting at 45. So again, very excellent results. The GPU is only using 30% of its power. So you could probably crank the settings up more with a high resolution system just to really utilize the full capability of the system. I just wanted to show a little bit of a noise test. I'm just using my mouse as a reference. The pump is set to 3000 RPM. I did try a little bit lower, 2000, and I found the temps were rising a little bit, especially for the noise level. It's almost inaudible at 3000. On the mic, it might sound a little bit different, but in person, you can barely hear anything. Something I really wanted to cover, and that was regarding the compatibility issues we might have had. One of the big ones was with the graphics card. So in our system we have a Galaxy 3060 Ti. It was originally a Trio card. The Trio and the Duo are exactly the same, it's just the fans being different, but the actual board is exactly the same. So when we ordered the card and we asked if it links, so if it matches the PCB with the water block, they were compatible. But what we didn't factor for was motherboard companies and graphics card companies make different versions of stuff, and especially with graphics cards, they don't really let you know when they've done that, and it's really hard to find a kind of tear down part of a graphics card, especially a 3060 Ti where not many people have really done it. But just make sure that if you are gonna water cool any graphics card, to double check the PCB of the board and make sure that it is the same model, and if there has been iterations, double check, maybe ask the manufacturer and see if they have a new version of the block. There was only really one other issue that I noticed when building in the NV7 PHANTEKS case. That was to do with the distro plate. If you had a radiator, like a standard radiator against that, or a distro plate for any regard, and you need to line it up in the back, you have to take it out and then screw it from the back. And you can't take it out if there's a radiator installed in the top. So you have to unscrew the top radiator, put the distro plate back in, and then make sure that you have exactly the height, because if you want to adjust it, you can't actually adjust it from the back of the case. It's a little bit of an oversight, but again, very minor thing. In all, love the case. Really think it finishes the build. Thanks for watching.
We'll be right back.